Spiders and snakes. Hello and welcome. Welcome to Input English. This episode is about spiders and snakes. Really, it's about the fears that we develop as we grow up. You may remember the famous movie, The Wizard of Oz. And in that movie, Dorothy and her friends confronted their fears. Lions and tigers and bears. Oh no! Evidence shows that children are not born with fears, they learn them over time, and they are taught fears by their parents. Now, parents mean well, and the intention of teaching fears is to protect the child. This is reasonable. In most places, lions and tigers and bears are not what we fear. Children in the United States are frequently taught to fear snakes and spiders. It's an interesting subject because the true risk of being injured as a child from spiders and snakes is relatively low. There is a risk, but it's relatively low. A child is much more likely to need hospital care for an injury falling off a bicycle than being bitten by a spider or a snake. A child is much more likely to be bitten by a dog and require hospital care compared to their risk of being bitten by a snake or a spider. Nonetheless, parents mean well and they teach their children what they think is appropriate. Growing up on the East Coast of the United States, there were 4 different kinds of poisonous snakes, and we were taught to fear those snakes. We rarely saw any of them. I never saw a coral snake in the wild, but rattlesnakes I did see in the wild, and the cottonmouth water moccasin I did see in the wild. In the eastern United States, those snakes can create bites that can be a real big problem for the person who is bitten. So that fear is rational. At the same time, the likelihood of being bitten by one of those snakes is quite low. In the wild, in nature, you're much more likely to see a non-poisonous snake as compared to a poisonous snake. Even though the risk of being harmed by a snake is low, people do have these fears. As a child, I was taught to be frightened of tarantulas and black widows. We were not taught that tarantulas are rather docile, very timid, and rarely seen in our area. I didn't see a black widow in nature until I was 20 years old. I never heard of any of my friends who were injured by spider bite. One time in college, we were practicing archery with a bow and arrow, and behind the archery target, I saw a black widow. This was the first time I had ever seen one, ever. And there it was, a black widow. And it also had an egg case. At the time, I was a college student, I was very curious, so we captured that in a jar. We captured the black widow in the jar and the egg case as well. What I had noticed is that the spider web that was made by the black widow was not a typical spider web orb with well-organized fibers. No, it was a network of disorganized fibers, and they were very, very strong. These disorganized webs made by spiders are called cobwebs. They're not the typical orb that you expect of a spider. We took the black widow and the egg case in the jar back to the dormitory so that we could look at it, show it to other students with the plan of bringing it back and releasing it into the wild. We did just that. What we had not planned on was that the egg case hatched. And so the next day we had a jar with a black widow and several dozen little miniature black widows. It was full of baby black widows. So we quickly showed that to everyone we could find. And then we took it back out to the archery range, opened the jar, and set it down so that they could escape and get back to nature. We knew that if we kept those spiders in that jar for a long time, they would all die. So that was not our purpose. It was after I moved to California that I saw my first tarantula. This tarantula was walking across a small road. And I stopped the car and got out and examined it as it made its way across the road. It was perhaps 3 inches in diameter, very hairy, and it moved relatively slowly. I've not seen one of those since. Based on what I've read about tarantulas, that was probably a migrating male in search of a mate. In California, we do have black widows. When we were living on the ranch in the Central Valley near Sacramento, we had a barn. The barn had a lot of crevices and places to hide, so we saw quite a few black widows. When I was cleaning the barn right after we got the small ranch, my hand came across some very hard, strong spider web fibers. It was a cobweb of a black widow. And I noticed how strong those fibers were. So I went into the house and got a flashlight because in the relative darkness in the barn, I couldn't see a black widow. It was hidden. With a flashlight, however, looking, there was the black widow. And continuing to look, I looked in similar locations throughout the barn, and I didn't find another black widow. No, I found 6 more black widows. The barn was full of black widows. It appeared that we had bought a black widow breeding ground. Now, at that point, I had a choice. I had been taught from childhood to kill spiders and snakes because they are a risk to humans and they should all be killed, right? And kill all the germs while you're at it. But having grown up a bit and learned a lot more about this topic, it was pretty clear that killing all these spiders did not benefit anyone. These spiders were in the barn doing their job, and they didn't realistically create any big risk to me. So I killed none of them, left them all be. I figured they had a job to do, and I should let them do it. It's fairly common for us to see spiders in the house. And the question is, what do we do about spiders in the house? Should we kill them all? Should we smack them with something or spray them with some poison? Should we try to eradicate all the spiders in the house? I think not. I was taught to do that as a child, but I don't kill spiders any longer. We don't have a lot of spiders in the house. Every now and then you see one. Occasionally, when I come out in the morning to fix coffee, there's a spider in the sink. I think a lot of people would just turn the water on and run that spider down the drain, but I don't do that. I simply put my hands in the sink and let the spider get on my hand and then turn it loose someplace outside the sink. Again, my assumption is that spider's got a job to do. I'm going to let him do that job. What about snakes? Well, we don't see a lot of snakes. Most of the snakes that we do see are non-poisonous. In California, a common snake you might see is a king snake. They're beautiful. And they are very different in appearance from any poisonous snake. You wouldn't make a mistake about their identity. In general, I leave snakes alone. It doesn't make any sense to try to handle a wild animal like a snake. Why would you do that? I don't need to do that. Well, there is a circumstance that it is reasonable. What if the snake is basking on a road or a bicycle trail? Well, then that snake is at risk of being run over by a tire. Years ago, we were driving on a small, quiet road, and I saw a snake in front of us basking on the pavement of the road. It was a cool day, and that pavement was warm, and so it appeared that the snake was warming itself, basking in the sun there. The trouble is, other cars could run over that snake and kill it. So I stopped, and to the surprise of my wife, I walked up to the snake, picked it up, and tossed it into the bushes off the road. We talked about that after I had done it, and she absolutely did not expect that I would jump out of the car and go pick up a snake. My rationale was clear. Rescue the poor snake from death by being run over by a car. This happened again when we were riding bicycles on a bicycle trail in the park system here. We were riding, I was paying attention, and I saw a California king snake on the bike path. It was a cool day. The snake was clearly warming itself on the warm pavement, normal behavior, but a bicycle tire across the back of a snake would certainly result in the snake's death. So I got off the bicycle, went over to the snake, picked it up, and tossed it into the bushes. Well, my wife was no longer surprised by that behavior. She'd seen it before, and she's likely to see it again. In general, I don't handle snakes. When dealing with poisonous snakes, trying to handle them is a surefire way of increasing the probability that you will be bitten. It's not uncommon for a young man to try to handle a poisonous snake and get bitten and wind up needing medical care because of his own behavior. So I don't try to handle poisonous snakes. If I see a snake and I know it's poisonous, I give it wide berth. I stay away from it, stay far away from it. But I'm not going to kill it. No. So children are not born with fears. They have to be taught. They have to be carefully taught. We can understand why children would learn to fear spiders and snakes, but realistically, spiders and snakes don't represent a major risk to us as we grow up and become adults. I was taught to kill spiders and snakes, but as an adult, I leave them be. I figure they have a job to do. Let them go do their job. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We invite comments below, of course, and I hope you join us in future videos. See you soon.